Hello, everyone. Today we are talking about exercise order, and we're going to perform some practice and talk a little bit about applications. So a little bit like Tetris and how you kind of want to set yourself up for success in Tetris. That's a little bit like when we're programming and how we're going to design our exercise order. So we want to sort of begin with the end in mind and just think about how things are going to flow during the workout. So just like Bruce Lee said, we need to be like water. We want these workouts to flow and be natural and kind of just cause us little additional stress. So sort of doing things like avoiding overpopulation of equipment during sections of the lift, or maybe picking on too many of the same muscles or energy systems within a single lift, and just things like that. So we want things to be stressful and we want to cause change, but we don't want to be unnecessarily stressful on our lifters or athletes. So one training block, or I guess a workout, might be kind of looking at an older slide that we've had in the past in the program, is as we look at how a lot of training sessions actually flow from power to strength, movement to a complex accessory or two, to some simple accessories and maybe a finisher or the cool down. So as we're kind of taking these steps along the way, you can definitely do things in different formats. We've discussed that, as long as you've got logic and rationale and you know why you're doing things in a different manner or fashion. We know that that's not a problem. Just make sure you know why you're doing it that way. But if you're going to be looking at a normal lift, it's going to kind of flow in this direction. And in different sections, you might have multiple lifts. So let's just kind of get associated with our lift here. And keep in mind that with each of these different sections of a lift, when we're focusing on different priorities, we have different loads and reps and sets and optimal and different rest times. So keep that in mind while we are moving through the rest of this presentation. So we know that for energy, to optimize our energy within a lift, this flow works pretty well. That power output is going to be quick and brief, and a lot of athletes will say that that's the most important exercise of the day for them. It could be. And then that strength work is going to be the heaviest work of the day, and possibly the most neurologically challenging, our greatest risk for injury, and really where a lot of athletes or lifters are going to want to make sure that they are fresh for this. Usually we're not exhausted from from a little bit of power training. And so that with that strength work, that's sort of going to be our peak of stress for the day for many lifts. And then as we move from there, going on to our complex accessories. So on a given, maybe we have a lower body focus day. So perhaps we do like some RDLs and glute bridges and box jumps. So stressing triple extension, stressing the posterior chain. And then moving on from there, we might go into simple accessories, a couple exercises being potentially like ab wheel rollouts or trap shrugs. And let's say our finish for the day was a prowler push race. So still looking at our energy, still with the energy in mind, let's continue to kind of pick this lift apart. Okay, so there's decent logic for the way that things are flowing, right? I think we could agree. I think we could also disagree. There's logic against it, but there's decent rationale for why things are flowing in the direction that they are. But could it be better? What could we change to maybe improve it to make sure it's most energy efficient? Well, if we look here, the RDL, if we look in our C block, the RDL and the glute bridge are going to pick on pretty similar muscle groups. That posterior chain, the glutes are going to be highly involved in both of those movements. So is there anything we could do to maybe disperse or spread out the energy allocation within our lift? Well, looking at our D block here, what if we just pulled one of these movements, such as, in this instance, I'm going to go with the ab wheel rollout. So I would move maybe our D1 up to our C2, and our C2 to substitute for our D1. And so the new flow would be going from RDL to ab wheel rollouts to box jumps. So three pretty unrelated exercises. The RDLs and the box jumps have some carryover, but you're not hammering on the same energy systems. You're also spreading out your equipment. So maybe having a lifter go over and do RDLs. And if we haven't written in dumbbell RDL, if it's just RDL, I tend to assume it's a barbell RDL, although that would be a nice detail to add into the mix. So we'd maybe go do an RDL of some kind, and then we would go into a little bit of open space for our ab wheel rollout exercise. And then we could go over to where the boxes are and do some box jumps. And so if we wanted to flow pretty well, maybe we do a dumbbell RDL, and then we do, maybe instead of like a little like $25 ab wheel, you just put plates on a bar and you use the barbell for your wheel rollouts. So maybe we use dumbbells on our RDLs, and then we use a barbell for our wheel rollouts, and then we go do box jumps. So that's going to flow fairly well. And then we would pair glute bridges with barbell trap shrugs. And if you have limited equipment, maybe your barbell trap shrugs become dumbbell trap shrugs, and you could do a barbell glute bridge. Or if you're not using weight on that glute bridge at all, then equipment is not much of an issue. And then that prowler race at the end, if you've never pushed a prowler, I will warn you that they are an incredible tool for developing speed, strength, and also just exhausting the body and making you, not that throwing up is a good thing, but it will make you throw up or get pukey much better than anything else that I've seen. So you want that prowler race at the end of the workout. If you can help it, that's how you want that workout to flow. So there's a little bit of a dissection of what could maybe be better. And then let's look at this other day 2, which is kind of an upper body focus. Okay, we've got a little power exercise with the med ball vert toss, and we've got a strength exercise with a bench press. And then we have a complex movement, a complex accessory, an isolated accessory, and then what could be maybe another accessory or potentially a finisher, but we have it all in that C block. So that's not super, it doesn't flow very well. So just sort of envision going from pull-ups, which use the biceps quite a bit, into bicep curls, so our biceps are pre-fatigued, into farmer carries. So you've done 3 exercises in a row that challenge your grip and your hands. And so by the time you get to that farmer's carry, the grip is going to be pretty fatigued. And because the way that we've set this up with C1, 2, and 3, we can assume that there's going to be multiple sets. So let's just say it's 3 by, let's say it's 3 by 5. Let's say that's 3 by 10. We'll say that's 3 by 60 yards. So the first set, maybe we get through it all well, but that farmer carry is going to be mitigated because of all the bicep curls are going to be mitigated from the pull-ups, and the farmer carries are going to be mitigated from the pull-ups and the bicep curls. And then if we took a pretty substantial break, we could probably regenerate and be pretty good for set 2. And then as we go through, and we'd need another pretty substantial break of maybe 3 to 5 minutes before we can be refreshed for set 3. But even a long set like that of 3 to 5 minutes, if you're pushing hard enough on those 3 exercises, there's just so much overlap of what muscles and what kind of work you're doing that you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So what might be better would be to let's clear this out a little bit. So what might be better would be to maybe pair the bench press. We'll call that B1. Maybe we'll pair the bench press with our pull-ups. So automatically we have probably improved the quality of our pull-ups because we are reducing just that repetitive fatigue within the same complex or the same circuit. And then as far as having bicep curls and farmer carries in the same complex, 2 big reasons that I would avoid that is, one, again, I don't want my grip and my forearms being so fatigued that it's reducing the quality after the first set. The quality of the sets are just going down. I have no problem with fatigue and working hard, but to just pick on the same muscle groups like that may not be beneficial, especially when the second reason I would be concerned about pairing those 2 exercises would be that I don't necessarily want high bicep activation when I go to do farmer carries. So let's say this was something heavier, such as a trap bar. If it's a trap bar farmer carry, we might assume that there may be a couple 100 pounds on here. And that could be a good time to maybe strain or tweak those biceps. And that is, that's not of interest to anybody. So what could we do a little bit differently here? Maybe we create a D block and we send bicep curls down there. And instead of bicep curls there, what else could we do? What would pair nicely with some farmer carries? What about maybe like some face pulls? And then we could do our bicep curls, sort of like a little weight room candy, a little dessert, if you will. We could do some bicep curls at the end and maybe pair that with an ab exercise or something along those lines. So in that case, our energy is going to flow a little bit better during the lift. We're probably going to be a little bit more efficient. We're not going to need, now in that B block, you're probably going to want longer breaks because that's sort of your strength block, and you're doing 2 really big compound exercises in the same complex, which is not ideal, but it's one way that you could go as long as you integrate sufficient rest. So we've looked at rest, so we've got our rest column over here. So from our bench press to our pull-up, maybe we give ourselves something along the lines of like 45 seconds. And then from our pull-ups, before we go back to our bench press, maybe we give ourselves something like 90 seconds. And there's definitely some overlapping muscles that are activated in those movements, but but they are not going to necessarily destroy each other's efficacy or effectiveness as long as we're putting in some breaks there. Now, maybe if there's a big max out set on one of those, you would extend the break time. Something like that could help boost the success of the lift. But always be thinking about that energy. How can I get my lifts to flow so that my lifters or myself are feeling good going into the exercise, and that we're going to benefit from the exercise. And remember, it's not if you can get through a lift, it's what you can get out of a lift. So we don't necessarily just want to smash our athletes and make them hate their lives. And the prowler push down here can do that really quickly. So with that prowler race, even that we want to be a little conservative. We want to boost success as opposed to breed failure. So as far as how you flow your energy, just be aware that our athletes are going to get tired, and you want them to stay safe, and you also want high quality training occurring. So with these farmer carries, with our original setup with those farmer carries, if you actually want that grip to grow and improve, and maybe that's the purpose of your farmer carry, maybe you're calling it a core exercise, well, the way that it's set up within that other complex, you're just not going to get a whole lot out of that farmer carry, especially on your second and third sets if we're following that 3-set scenario. Okay, so let's look at sort of a different philosophy and maybe a different approach. Matt Wenning is a powerlifter, and again, powerlifting is not the goal, but what we're going to do when we're training athletes is we're going to beg, borrow, and steal. When we want to grow certain strength exercises, we're going to steal from powerlifting. When we want to grow certain Olympic exercises, we'll probably steal a little bit from the Olympic weightlifting community. When we want athletes to run faster, we might look a little bit at the track community and what are they doing. When we want athletes to grow and get bigger, we might dive into the bodybuilding community. So while powerlifting is not the main goal for many athletes, we just want to borrow from them and consider what they're doing, because if it's their one goal in life to get stronger, maybe that's something that we can borrow from. And Matt Wenning, having squatted, benched, and deadlifted some pretty big weights, knows a few things about lifting weights. So we like to borrow from him as well. And with his Wenning warm-ups, he's taking a different approach. And what he's doing is he's challenging the conditioning of lifters and athletes. And he's sort of changing up the warm-up and making it much more challenging. And he's going to pre-fatigue and aggressively activate muscles that will be involved in sort of the lift of the day. So I would encourage you all to maybe dive a little bit further into his teachings. But I would say that what he's going to do is he's going to take, historically, these, maybe some movements in here, maybe these exercises would be used to develop that posterior chain, and with the squat being priority and then going over here. But with your Wenning warm-ups, or with a more aggressive conditioning approach, you'd actually be kind of rewriting the script a little bit here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you're actually kind of rewriting the script a little bit here and kind of changing the flow of the whole workout. And so Matt Wenning makes a really great case for the need for athletes to boost their conditioning. And then by boosting their conditioning, now we're not talking about going out and swimming laps or running, trail running in order to become, 1,000-pound squatters or something like that. But in pre-fatiguing the muscles that are supposed to be working or should be working on bigger lifts, we're really kind of boosting our chances for activating those muscles during the lifts and making them stronger. This is going to sort of preemptively grow our weak link ahead of time. And as this approach to warming up has caught on and become more popular, it's working for a lot of people. So it's something that we might want to consider. And so in the normal approach, complex accessories tend to be more in the hypertrophy block down here. But when they're in that warm-up block, it's going to be a little bit more like muscle endurance. We're going to have a lot of reps. We're going to be doing sets, instead of sets of about, sets of 8, you might be doing sets of 20 or 25, because again, you're growing the conditioning of that muscle and you're also activating the heck out of it. So that would be some winning warm-ups, and that would sort of change your approach to the flow of the workout. But if you have a rationale for it, that's why we would maybe kind of throw a curveball and change things up there, is because you have a rationale. And again, what would you do over here? You would take that C block. You take that C block and basically put it up in front of everything else. Now, does that mean that later on in the lift, you're not going to return and perform some similar exercises to that? Depends on how much time you have and what kind of shape you're in and how advanced of an athlete you are. So if I have beginner athletes and I'm doing a more aggressive warm-up like that, I'm probably just going to go in and hit my other lifts and move on with my life. If I've got an advanced lifter, an advanced athlete, then I would maybe classify that as just a warm-up once it's been shifted into the warm-up. And I would maybe revisit some of those movements or similar movements as my accessories within the lift. So it just kind of depends on what kind of shape and condition and what your population is with that athlete. And what would you do for maybe a bench press day? What would go into that warm-up? How about remember, the bench press is often used to develop pecs, but for many lifters, it's actually going to be better to service the growth of triceps, and we want to activate our back ahead of time. So what might we do for that bench press? We may do some tri push downs and some lat pull downs. And then we could also do a little core. We could do some glute bridges, or let's do hip thrust. Because remember, that bench press is a full body exercise. And we want to plant our feet into the ground and stay tight throughout the whole body from our toes to our hands. And so with these 3 exercises, you're now, if you want to take that mat winning approach with the winning warm-ups, with those 3 exercises, you would maybe do 3 sets of 20 per side, or 20 per movement, excuse me. And then you can boost your conditioning over time. And sort of the corollary between that better conditioning and getting stronger is that the better your conditioning is, the more heavy sets you can take within a training session without sort of tapering off and fading away. So it's not all about just lifting heavy weights and then taking long breaks. There is a carryover of conditioning, as long as it's the right conditioning. Again, I enjoy running, but if I go out and run marathons, it's not necessarily going to help my squat. So another factor that we need to keep in mind is your space, time, and equipment. Even though we want athletes to get stronger, we may not always program out a 90-minute training session that barely raises their heart rate and gives them plenty of rest in between sets. So while that may be ideal for making them as strong as possible, is it going to prepare them for their sport? Is it going to fit within the guidelines of reality? If you have an hour of time and you got to get them in and out between when they have classes and when they have practice, that's not really realistic. And then just kind of knowing your space and knowing your equipment. On the left here, I put an image of Lindenwood University's weight room, and it is a huge, magnificent facility. There's 20 squat racks. The place used to be a horse corral back when, I think, back in the 1980s and earlier. So this is where they'd bring horses over and trot them around and do whatever they do with horses in a horse corral. And it's a huge space, but once you get 4 teams in there, 100, 120 athletes in there, it's not big anymore. And even if it's 3 teams and it's more like 60 athletes, you need to start communicating with who's going to be on the cable machines at what time, who's going to be over on the side track at what time. So all that big space basically disappears when you get enough people in there. So communicating ahead of time and knowing what you're going to have access and when you're going to have access to it, it's a big deal. And then on the right, I have sort of a typical sort of personal training facility. And if you look in the image here, you can see they have 1 squat rack. So if you want to do some barbell squatting, you're going to need to talk to other people that are in the facility and coordinate. So if you want to squat in the beginning of your lift and the other person is already sort of in there, then you got to find other things to do until that squat rack opens up. And if you take a little bit of time to communicate ahead of time and to maybe pre-plan, things are going to flow just so much better. And I remember having a women's lacrosse team that I was coaching one day at the university. So that huge space on the left, and I wanted to do some trap bar squats with them. And I didn't communicate ahead of time, and some other coaches were using them. And all I did was I just shifted my trap bar squats. It's actually sort of a testing day towards the end of the lift. And I thought, oh, we'll just go through the rest of the lift, and then we'll do those at the end. And I didn't make any other adjustments. All I did was rearrange the order, which sometimes you get away with and it's not a problem. But on that given day, I had quite a bit of core work within the normal lift. And then we went to do the heavy trap bar work at the end. All my ladies, their cores were crumbling underneath the weights. And it got dangerous, and I sort of had to like shut them down and tap out of that. So if I had changed the rest of the lift, I could have done the trap bar work later on, no problem. But because I didn't make the right adjustments, the day was sort of a wash. Luckily, nobody got hurt. But just something to think about is that sometimes when you change one thing, there is sort of that butterfly effect where other things change inadvertently, or you should be changing other things. So still thinking about space, time, and equipment, let's look at the lifts we have here and see if we can make them. Let's just kind of brainstorm on some possible situations here. Okay, so looking at this sort of day 1 lift, if I'm coaching a team, maybe have them all clean together. Everybody cleans at the same time, and then everybody could squat together and everybody squats at the same time. But what happens when we get down into that C block? You go about it a few different ways. If this is going to be a loaded glute bridge, barbell loaded glute bridge, then what you'd want to do is make your RDLs dumbbell RDLs. And box jumps are off to the side and shouldn't be much of a problem. Now coming down here with that wheel rollout, we discussed earlier how that might be a barbell wheel rollout, or it may be a smaller sort of like $30 gizmo that is just for it's an ab wheel. But if we're using that bar, you got to think, do we have 2 barbells per rack? Do we have the space? Are we able to do barbell rollouts with these bars and barbell trap shrugs with those bars? Is that going to be a possibility? Or do we need to do something like maybe transfer our wheel rollouts into a very similar exercise, like a physio ball rollout? Or do we need to turn our barbell shrugs into dumbbell shrugs? And so this is going to help sort of change the, just in case you're not overlapping and one bar is supposed to be doing 2 different things. So something to keep in mind with your resources, not just the energy. We kind of went over the energy of the lift earlier, but actually the physical space and the physical items that are in the facility. And then with that prowler race at the end, if you can't get access to the other prowlers, or to the prowlers and the space, I don't know that I would do a prowler race that day, because those prowler races can be so stressful and traumatic to lifters. I don't know that I would take my E-block and just dump it at the beginning, because a prowler race at the beginning could have a big detriment to the rest of the lift that day. Now you could so instead of just rearranging things, you could still take those prowlers if you can get on them at the beginning, but instead of doing prowler races, you could just do some technique work. You could use them on a light side and be nice and just use them for a little bit of a warm-up. So that way you're still getting your athletes some prowler time and you're still making use of it. And it's still something different, but I would not just move one thing in that case. I would adjust what you're doing with the prowlers just to be safe. Okay, so looking over at day 2, there's not much space overlap. We had talked about maybe pairing the bench press and the pull-up, but you got to think that if you're doing pull-ups in your rack where you do bench press, that may not be a very good idea, especially depending on how many lifters and how many racks you have. So that might be a no-go. So while it was an okay thought for lifting and the energy of the physiological energy of a lifter, in reality, that may not be the best way to flow this lift. So what could we do that's maybe just a little bit more concise? We could do, I think your pull-ups are not going to interfere too much with your bench press. So we could save that bench press for later, and we could just go A1 and A2. So with our med ball vert toss, sort of that power exercise, just because we're supersetting it with some pull-ups, oh, that's not A2. Just because we're supersetting it with some pull-ups doesn't mean that we're going to totally destroy the speed and the power impulse that comes from our med ball work. It's just something to watch out for, is that you may not get as high quality of the med ball work when you're pairing it with a large complex muscle building exercise such as the pull-up. But they're not interfering too much with each other. They're both kind of core exercises, but the pull-ups doesn't use the legs. It's not a pressing exercise, whereas the med ball vert toss would be a full body exercise that really relies on the legs, the core, and some pressing from the upper body. So by doing that, yes, we're going to be a hair more fatigued when we get to the bench press, but our flow of our lifts is going to work better. And so now let's say we're going to bench press as our B1. What could be B2? It's not my favorite way to flow it. I would probably start adding in different exercises, but you could pair that with a farmer carry. Now you want strong grip on your bench press because you don't want your wrist getting folded and collapsed back. But if you're doing that farmer carry and pre-fatiguing, maybe you give yourself basically no rest from the bench press into the farmer carry, and then you give yourself sort of a significant rest from the farmer carry back into the bench press. And then you're left with some, what's this? Our C movement could be some bicep curls, and then D movement could still be that push-up competition. So for the use of equipment, we might be able to just flow the lift like that. It's just to rethink it and reorder it just a little bit to make the logistics of it work a little bit better. So having a battle plan, not just for what's best for the athlete, but what's actually going to be realistic for the facility that you're in. Having a battle plan, just something that makes sure that things are going to flow well, that as you get experience, that just takes a few extra seconds or a couple extra minutes to maybe talk to the other coaches around you or the other lifters around you, and to create a better product of a lift than basically just getting frustrated and putting your hands in your pockets and saying, okay, I'll just wait and do that later, or I can't get in the squat rack, then I'm not even going to lift today. So I'm just getting good at creating a backup plan sort of on the fly. It comes with experience, but also sort of think back to knowing your principles, and then you could just shift different methods in to substitute for maybe you can't do prowler pushes that day, or maybe you can't even get your hands on a barbell that day. But if you know why you were going to use a barbell, maybe you can get dumbbells. Maybe you have access to the cable machines. Maybe all you need to do is switch your method, but your principle can stay the same. So keep in mind that when we start rearranging things, you don't just shift the movement. You actually are going to shift around the. Sometimes you need to shift how you're utilizing the movement. Let's see here. So not sure I have too much to kind of ramble on this. I feel like I rambled pretty good on it already. I will say this, when we are following sort of the traditional flow like this, then that allows us to stick to sort of the traditional load and goal repetitions and everything like that. But if we are going to start rearranging things and maybe doing some, maybe pulling some of our complex exercises. So instead of our complex accessories being in that 6 to 12 range, we talked about how they might be more in that muscular hypertrophy range. So that's going to be pretty common. But what about when we take our finisher and put it in at the beginning? Maybe we have to do a challenge there. Again, I would not maintain some tough and drag out movement that's going to exhaust my lifters at the beginning of the day. So I would not take that prowler push race, and if I put it at the beginning instead of the end, I would drastically change the approach there, because that's something that's easily going to shock muscles in the body and exhaust athletes. So that's just something to think about, is that how you approach it. And then let's look back to basically me getting lucky and my my lacrosse players not getting hurt, when I took my strength movement for the day, and because I didn't have access to the trap bars, and I ended up having it to be my last thing of the day, I didn't make any adjustments. I kept it heavy up in here. And what might have been better for me to do that day would be to lighten the load and just work on some technique and to make it more of a power-based exercise. So as more of a veteran who saw basically how terrible my athletes' form and fatigue, my form was due to fatigue. If I had to go back and do it again, instead of just moving the exercise towards the end, I definitely would have changed that load and the intensity. So I could have made it a much better opportunity to do some power training and to do some technique work, as opposed to, I love those girls. I wasn't trying to hurt them. It's not that I didn't care, but I didn't change anything. So that wasn't me protecting them. That was me unintentionally being sort of stubborn. So I would advise that you all don't make the same mistake. Oftentimes when we change one thing, we need to change multiple things. And then just as long as we're talking about what order things come in, I just want to incorporate sort of the idea of which comes first, strength or cardio. And I am of the school of thought, from the research I've seen and from the anecdotal cases I've seen, I'm from the school of thought that unless your job is to produce some pretty high level cardio or conditioning, such as a cross country athlete or a long distance track athlete, basically aside from those parties, or if you are of elite strength and power, but your conditioning is poor, I would advise the vast majority of the time to use strength first. So if it's the chicken or the egg that comes first, in this case, I'm going with strength. So looking back to our lifts that we had earlier, tell a little story about Arnold Schwarzenegger that he tells in this book over here. This book here. So in the book, he tells this story about having some bodybuilding success, but a lot of his critics were saying that he was never going to make it because of his calves. And once he heard this a couple of times and he went to a competition and I think he lost it, he came home and he took out every pair of pants that he had and he cut them all off. He took out a pair of scissors and cut them all off at the knee. And his mindset was that my calves are my weakness and I'm not going to hide my weakness. And what he started doing was every day he'd go into the gym, he would train his calves first. Or every day he was going to train his calves, he would not leave them towards the end, but he would actually start with them. And as you can see here in the pictures, his calves got in pretty good shape. And so that's the priority principle. So amongst all the other factors and variables that come, whether it's the equipment you have or your thoughts and your theories and your philosophy on energy consolidation and what we want to prioritize, think about that priority principle. So for me, because my introduction to the priority principle was Arnold Schwarzenegger, I always think about him in the story about cutting the pants off at the knee. But for our athletes, not everybody needs to become a big power lifter. Not everybody needs to become an Olympic weightlifter. Not everybody needs to increase their mile time or conditioning. Different people are going to have different weaknesses. And if we're training big groups, that can be hard to pocket and identify and train everybody a little bit differently. But with individuals, one thing we can do to kind of step our game up a little bit would be to train their weaknesses as a priority. So if I have a lifter who has poor glute activation, something that I might do is actually start the day with glute work. If I have a lifter whose core is extremely weak, something I might start the day with would be the ab rollouts. If I have a lifter who has an excellent clean, but they're weak, an excellent clean, but they're weak in the squat, maybe I don't clean them first. Maybe I squat them first. You know, that's kind of hard to tell. That's getting pretty nitty gritty. But the theory, the philosophy that I want to pass on to you guys is kind of knowing what to prioritize and what to spend more time on. If that lifter has a great clean, maybe their clean can actually stay up in front if you like that clean to occur up front. But maybe you don't put as many sets in. You reduce the sets there and add more sets on their squat. You know, as exercise scientists, we've got the science and the art, and it's up to us to kind of find that right program, that optimal program somewhere in between. And I'll kind of go back to our with our conditioning, with cardio and lifting on the same day, and maybe even the same training block. One of the reasons that we're going to want to just do the conditioning afterwards is because that running, let's say it's a run, that running is not really going to be hindered by a whole lot of lifting. Now, maybe if you have a crazy leg day in the weight room, it will hurt your output on a run. But if you're going to go run and then lift, the cardio before a lift tends to hurt the lift more than the lift before the cardio. So with that being said, your cardio is probably going to go out of these two lifts. If you're going to include cardio, your cardio is probably going to go towards the end of day 2. That upper body lift is going to be less stressful, less, especially on the legs, but also on the nervous system. And so we're probably going to have a little bit more energy and just be kind of more up for a run on that day. And I would do it at the end of that day. And again, if you have cross-country runners or athletes who have superior strength, I've only been around a few athletes who have been so strong that you start looking for, you start brainstorming on what to do besides strength training. I've only been around a few of those individuals in my life, or in my experience as a coach, but just have a concept, have a rationale for when and why you're doing your conditioning work compared to your strength work. And it may boil down to you have no other opportunities due to their schedule. Maybe you can't get into the weight room, but you can get onto the track. And so maybe all of our physiology and all of our discussions get flushed down the toilet and we just do what we got to do. And again, be looking at this template. It's super easy, it's super simple, but utilizing it and helping structure our lifts and organize will allow us to make changes when we need to, whether we shift things up or down. We can put notes off to the side as far as how fatigued they were and how maybe we want to make changes for the following week. But just having something like this helps us stay organized. And organization tends to be one of our greatest predictors for success. Awesome. Good work, guys.